my panelists, I just want to drop a statistic or a fact that many of you are not going to be aware of, and that is that leasing office space is really expensive. You're probably unaware of that fact, but I wanted to drop that nugget right there. How we utilize this required asset in leased office space is obviously up to each company in its own ways. I think it's really extremely important that companies view their office space as much more than a vessel where people sit and work on their computers, but as the home for your companies, and how you can build your culture and how you can grow your team and grow your culture the right way. It can be done properly through a variety of different ways. So joining me today are three friends and colleagues. Darcey Harrison from Swiftype, who runs operations over there. Mihir Gandhi, who is the general manager at Lyft. And my business partner, Jonathan Allen, from our San Francisco office, who handles technology clients such as Reddit and several others. So thank you all for joining us. The first thing I really wanted to talk about was the intersection of how a company uses office space. And obviously it is necessary to have office space, but for early stage companies especially, cash is like oxygen, and it's very important to be prudent with it. And to my earlier mind-blowing fact that office space is extremely expensive, it's important to be prudent with how you use it. So I think it's important for companies to leverage their office space and their real estate to recruit and retain. And how you do that is using what is already here and what is already accessible to the various locations where you choose, vis-a-vis access to public transit, access to things like walking trails. In Oakland, we have Lake Merritt, which many of my technology clients use as a recruiting tool for various employees and whatnot. And I think that the public transit market and the outdoor spaces really plays an important role with millennials and where they choose to work. So I don't know if you three have any comments on that or how you've seen those type of factors included in kind of real estate choices, but I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I'll start with that. I've had a lot of experience specifically working with millennials in the tech area, and everyone, thinks about all of these fun perks that they think about, but there's so much more to it than that, and thinking about what helps build the culture in your office. And it could be something as small as a ping pong table or something as cool as a terrace or a roof deck that you have. But it's really what you do with that space and how you use it to bring the team together, build camaraderie, and have the whole executive team really participating in what that looks like. And I think when you're trying to build a team and you focus on your candidates, they feel that when they come into your space. They get the sense of who this company really is, what it's about. Is this a place where I feel I can make an impact and have fun at the same time, which is really important.
True.
Yeah, so prior to my time at Lyft, I was at a food tech company called Munchery. Was with them for a few years through some pretty massive expansion here in the Bay Area. And to that point, I think there's a lot of fun, cool perks that people think about for putting in their offices. We built out about 7 or 8 facilities while I was there across the Bay Area. And what's necessarily fun or cool isn't always necessarily functional. And it's also not necessarily authentic to what the company stands for or what that particular facility stands for. So authenticity is particularly interesting. Building what you think someone else wants, but not necessarily is what you want, creates a cognitive dissonance as soon as someone walks in the office. They're able to say, there's a keg over there, but no one ever has a beer and then go back to their desk, right? And that creates a cognitive dissonance, even though you think it may be something that millennials may like to have. So I think authenticity is a piece of it that oftentimes gets lost for the bells and whistles. So something that we thought about quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, most of my... Wow, that's loud.
Hot mic.
Yeah. Most of my work is in San Francisco, but we are beginning to see more and more companies consider Oakland. Not because it's a discounted play, which traditionally that's why people think I'm going to move my company or part of my company to Oakland because it's 50% cheaper. It's not anymore. It's 20% or less cheaper. But they're doing it because Oakland stands out by itself. And one group that we're working with at the moment decided they were going to move 40 of 150 employees to Oakland because commutes in the Bay Area are so much longer than they used to be, that they wanted this location in Oakland for their East Bay employees. So they figured about 40 people to want to work over there. They put a survey around the whole office, and they figured out when that survey came back that it was closer to 70 or 80 people. So they were using Oakland as a perk almost to reduce people's commutes.
Interesting. Thank you. I think it's Oakland is starting to get the credit it deserves for the outdoor space, the access to public transit. But to Jonathan's point, it really is almost to a scary degree beginning to stand on its own. And I think it speaks volumes to the access to obviously to public transit and things like Lake Merritt in the area. When we were setting up this panel and we were sort of talking via email and via phone, the one word that really came up over and over again in terms of how to build the right company culture, whether it be a small company or a big company, the one word was transparency that came up that was so critical. I, previous to being in my current company, was at a very, very large commercial real estate corporation. And what was crazy to me was the lack of transparency within the company from high level to low level. And I think to your point earlier, Mihir, it creates cognitive dissonance. Even when it happens on a small item, it begins to build kind of distrust within teams. Obviously, some HR issues have to be dealt with in private and whatnot, but one of the things that we talked about internally before this panel was the importance of being transparent. And I know, Mihir, we talked a little bit about your time at Munchery and seeing when your VPs would lead a meeting in front of their low-level employees, how critical it was for those employees to see you give the VP leading the meeting feedback in front of the lower-level employees so that they could see them giving and receiving feedback and walking the walk, essentially.
Yeah, so I think, the way we thought about a lot of office space, so raise a show of hands, how many people know what Munchery is? Okay, that's really good. For those of you who don't, think of it as a fully vertically integrated restaurant with no front end. Instead, our chefs cooked the food, they chilled it down, and then we also delivered it. And so, no front end to the restaurant, just daily changing menus and you order, and it's consumer facing. What was interesting about it is there's actually two different types of spaces. The headquarters space, which is very much marketing, design, engineering, finance, some of those centralized functions, and then fulfillment and distribution centers, which are literally, lots of shift workers that work on fulfilling orders, working in a cold room, printing out tickets, delivering food, so on and so forth. So two very different work models. And I think, being part of the team that floated back and forth across the two, what was particularly important was how do you build space in a way that is functional and authentic to what the facility is trying to accomplish. And a big part of that on both sides, both the headquarters and the fulfillment centers, was around delivering feedback and how you deliver it. Namely, there was a lot of breakout rooms at headquarters where initially the thought process was, hey, let's have these breakout rooms. Groups of 2, groups of 4 can get together and have smaller meetings. We don't need any of those at the fulfillment centers because we want to optimize the amount of cold space that we have so we can maximize throughput and so on and so forth. And then as we started to think more deeply through it, it's like, there's a lot of really junior people who are going to be coming through these doors who probably need a lot of coaching. And some of that coaching should happen in public, and some of that should happen in private. And what the building layout looked like and how we configured the space was particularly important, especially given how expensive space is in general, and even how much more expensive cold space is. And so the ability for, it didn't even matter the level you were, but if you had feedback you had to give, we had sort of rules around that and volume levels that you probably shouldn't go above. And 2 words you weren't allowed to use. But it was important, I think, for people to see, for us to understand how to configure the space for those 2 different environments, but then also how and when to deliver feedback within that construct.
Yeah, definitely. How about you, Darcey? Any comments on transparency and as relates to your work at Meraki or?
Yeah, so I'll say with my most recent move, the first question my mom asked me is, do you get your own office this time? And I started laughing and I said, no, I don't want my own office. We appreciate that the executive team sits out on the floor, and it's important in all of the companies that I've worked at. So many of you are probably familiar with Meraki, which was acquired by Cisco several years ago, but the executive team there always sat on the floor. Not only were they accessible, you got to overhear their conversations, and that's something that I've taken with me to my last few companies. And today, the CEO and I sit right next to each other, and our team hears every conversation we have, and that's part of the reason they want to join a small company. It's attractive for them to really be able to see what the executives talk about and hear conversations about how decisions are being made and why we're thinking about certain things the way we do. So I think there's a huge amount of value, especially in today's workforce. They want to know what's going on.
I think those type of items are invaluable, especially with the competition for good millennial workers and others that they have so many options and where to go and large compensation packages. And it really, I think with all things being the same, it really comes down to the vibe and feel within a space. And I think transparency probably speaks a lot to that.
And can I jump in for a sec?
Please.
So on that point, there was an interesting culture when I walked into Munchery to the first offices, and then we moved offices, and I'll talk about a little bit how that transition kind of changed the culture. Personally, I think for the worse. So when I walked into the offices the first day, there was a buzz, and there was chatter going on. Even though half the company were engineers, there was chatter going on. The engineers had their headphones on. For those of you who are as old as me, headphones are like the new cube walls. Cube walls don't exist anymore, so when you want to be left alone, you put your headphones on until someone talks to you and then taps you. And then, there was this buzz going on in the office, and I couldn't really figure out what it was. And halfway through my interviews, I realized that was the customer care team. And they were actually located right in the middle of the office. And they were talking to customers about problems they were having with their food, with their delivery, with their order was wrong, this, that, and the other. And while that may, I think a lot of founders think about, hey, our most expensive resource are our engineers and our dev team. Let's make sure we build an environment that they would like and they want to work in. You can always put your headphones on and get your work done. But to be able to take your headphones out and hear what's happening at the most important part of your business, which is where the tip sort of touches the customer, was particularly important. And man, that was really revitalizing. It accelerated some product changes that may have taken meetings and meetings and tons of data and surveys to convince the dev team to dedicate resources to it. But they hear the same problem over and over 4 or 5 times in a night, or 20 or 30 times in a week. And holy cow, that gets fixed pretty fast. And so it was there was a buzz throughout the day and through the night, since we delivered to like 9 or 10. And then we moved to a different location, upstairs. It's a different location. And we built a soundproof room for the customer care team to go into. And then you walk into the offices and it's dead silent. Because it's a lot of dev people just hard at work with their headphones in. And the buzz was all in that room. And there was so much valuable information that was being bounced around those walls and then lost. And the translation didn't happen the same way. And so we built processes on how we can capture that information in the system and quantify it and communicate it. But it wasn't the same as having your lead engineer hear it for themselves with a customer care agent who's just struggling to maintain their sanity while the customer's yelling at them on the other line because someone put too much cumin in the chicken. There's usually something more than that. But that fundamentally changed the culture. And as we started to realize that more and more, we developed a rotational program, not just for people to rotate in and through the customer care office, but then also for the customer care team to rotate out on the floor and across all of our facilities. What was an interesting piece of this is, the cold rooms and our fulfillment centers, they're delivering something. They're delivering food, but it happens in packets and these packages, and it could be widgets for all they care. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect from the customer. Having the customer care agent around them when they're talking to customers reminds those staff members that, hey, we're delivering food to someone. That's going to be on someone's tabletop. And so then how you structure that cold room space becomes really important. How you lay out the floor becomes really important. And so that rotation to allow that transparency from all the way to the customer to the people who are handling the food to the founders and the engineers was particularly important. And so we were at a really good spot. The pendulum swung, and I think we went in the wrong direction, inadvertently, mind you. We thought that everyone would love having their own space and realized how different and how challenging it was for the culture and brought it all back. So it was an interesting sort of exercise in transparency.
Well, it's interesting, too, as you bring that up, because I think that's what we've seen with corporations that are now failing as the world is changing and as proper business models are failing, is that when one end of the company doesn't know what the other is doing, it never ends well. And I think the need for that, the thought of crosstalk, open environments is one to maximize density and cost savings, but it really is that communication, collaboration, and transparency. And hopefully, in some ways, it helps to let one end know what the other end is doing.
I feel really loud. I feel tech's leading the way as well, because I'm noticing practices that technology companies are putting in place that you guys led the way on, and now being adopted by engineers, traditional engineers, structural engineers, by architects, by law firms to a certain degree. They have certain privacy requirements, but they are opening their offices up more, and they are working with the technology more so there's better communication.
Well, it's probably a good lesson for kind of more traditional companies, architectural engineering, professional services, to take a page out of textbook. And in some way, perhaps there might be pages that tech can take out of their book as well in the same scheme. So, really talking about making sure that, as we talk about millennials and attracting millennials to your company, and Darcey, I know you've had a lot of experience with trying to recruit and retain and whatnot, and maybe you could speak a little bit to that, just about what you think is important to them. It's more than just the compensation package or what have you, but what companies and what founders and what small teams can do to attract the right talent.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's one word that always comes up when you're interviewing people in this generation, it's that they want to have impact. And being able to have impact is more than what their salary is or the ping pong table that we were talking about earlier. But back to the theme of transparency, this is one of the biggest reasons we've been able to attract not just talent, but really top talent that wants to be part of the innovation, because they get to know everything that's going on. And we all know it's not possible to have your fingers in every piece around the company, but to be able to have access to it and understand it and walk just across the hall 50 feet, and understand what's happening in product and what's happening in support and what's happening with the executive decisions that we're making. It makes a tremendous difference. I think anytime any employee feels that their opinion is not just valued but validated, it makes them more productive and more bought into the organization and really wanting to be part of winning.
So we Lyft just moved into new offices, or we're in the process of a transition, and it's interesting. They moved 2 or 3 groups of people over there, and that's kind of messing with some of the synergies across teams. And what's interesting to me is how and where companies decide to break up an organization, and where they decide to keep an organization together. And one of the things we're trying in the new space, even though there's distinct departments that have moved over there, is we all communicate by email, Slack, etc. So we don't necessarily need to sit next to the people that we are working with and in meetings with all day, every day. So we're actually taking a few pods that are across different departments and just mixing them up. So an engineer is sitting next to an enterprise salesperson is sitting next to someone on an ops team. And man, that fosters a very different kind of information flow than having the ops team all sit together, which they're in a ton of meetings anyway, and they communicate enough. And so we're trying this new thing. It's actually creating an interesting environment where, and I think I heard the previous speaker talk about, hey, I didn't know what so-and-so did or how they did it. We'll see how it works out, but it's something that we're testing out on the new space in terms of transparency and getting people to learn what's happening across the organization. So.
Yeah, it sort of gets back to feeling empowered. Yes, sir.
To what extent do you use remote workers? Do you telecommute?
Yeah, so at the company I'm with currently, we probably have 3 or 4 remote workers out of 35. Yeah, so a very, very small amount. And there, a few in Europe, a few in Canada. One of the things that we really focus on, though, is every week we're all, as an entire company, on a video call together, and we try and make sure that we participate in items together as much as possible. But it presents a very different challenge when you have one person working by themselves, because they don't get to experience the culture in the same way, or the fun team events that you do, or things like that. So we definitely have to plan more so that we can bring them to the home office and participate in those items with us. But yeah, it's a different feel.
So we shied pretty far away from it. We had one engineer in DC, and that was about it. And the challenge that we found was information passes so quickly, and you make decisions very quickly, and you pivot and you move all these small things that don't sound like they're that big, but someone's running on a thread of work, and they have the daily check-in at the end of the day, and they may have done 6, 7, 8 hours worth of work, moving down a path that we decided at 8 a.m. was not the right path for us to take. And so there's something about, in these sort of smaller pod companies, we shied pretty far away from that for that reason.
It sounds like you're doing what the Japanese, I work with big Fortune 500s in the Japanese, they open space, okay? What I like about what you're talking about is, I did a lot of program management and audio engineering stuff. The engineers, when you find an engineer that knows about the whole company, you've got yourself a winner, because when you're coming in as a supplier working on projects, it's so important that he can tell you where to go on different issues. I mean, that's really valuable, because engineers they're kind of segmented, you know what I mean? And they think differently. that's really smart. I have to say, I like what you do.
Thanks. We were one of the things we pride ourselves on was that when you talk to someone at the company, you didn't know what they did. As someone external looking in, it was something that I was really didn't know if you worked in the cold room or if you're an engineer. You should know the product end to end.
You should know at least who to have them call. That's the most important.
Yeah.
Because a guy told me when I worked for General Motors and was in the field, he said, "You are Mr. General Motors." And so they have to realize that when the phone calls, they are that company, your company, and that people do expect them to be able to, direct them to the right answer.
Yes, sir, you?
I had a question for Mihir, right? You had mentioned that once you segregated the customer success people who were on the phone, you come up with a bunch of systems and things of that nature. Could you describe a little bit more in detail like what that looks like? So I'm at a company that we don't take phone calls. It's all email support, right? I don't remember the last time one of our support persons was on the phone. So what were like some of the systems that you created around that? And can you describe a little bit more what you guys did to proactively sort of connect those dots with the other team members?
Yeah. So we took a lot of phone calls. We also use Salesforce as sort of the back end system. We did three things on a pretty regular basis. So other than like reporting metrics and so on and so forth, which is like table stakes, we brought in 2 customers on a monthly basis, one who had a bad experience and one who had a good experience. And we had a roundtable at our company-wide, or at least our department-wide. There's like, there's no substitute from hearing it from the customer. Unfortunately, I think a lot of engineers oftentimes don't get to interact or engage with customers, whether it's a B2B or B2C company. And so we didn't just bring in the rah-rah, hey, you guys are great, I love your food, had a great experience. Like, that gets a little bit old after a little while. And I think, especially for the group of people who are in this room, that's really not that helpful. What's really helpful is understanding where you're falling down and how you can then trying to figure out how to fix it. So we made sure to have someone who gave bad feedback or had a bad experience with us. And then the third thing that we did was we made sure customer care was involved in every single meeting that we had. And our customer care manager, managers, I should say, were really loud megaphones. We didn't want just like people pleaser. We wanted people who like wanted to stand up for the customer and like push their point of view, even though the VP of engineering is pushing hard against something. And so someone who would really hold their ground in those meetings, I think, from a layout perspective, making sure, like structurally, making sure we invited that person to every meeting was really important. And putting him in a box, like in that room, we called it the fishbowl. Was like the worst thing we could have done, and I'm happy to move away from it.
But was that scalable, like bringing in your customer success managers? I mean, would that scale to 1,000 employees, you think?
I think it depends on, so yes, it was. When we ultimately grew, sort of tripled in size in the time that I was there, it wasn't just the director of customer care, it was a series of managers who were responsible for being the point people for different departments. So even though engineering doesn't necessarily need a point person in customer care, they had one. And that person was actually the person who would sit in engineering and take calls and take cases.
Right.
Looks like we're out of time, guys. Thank you all for your questions. We'll be available for questions afterwards, and thank you, my panelists.